There we go. All right, we are live. Thanks for joining us today. I have a special guest today about it's a version of fantasy football a lot of people are not familiar with or do not utilize or aren't in enough leagues to be in. I heard it called Portfolio Dynasty, a bunch of different names for it, but it's when you have multiple leagues. I think you start at like 9, 10, 20, and go up to 500,000. I mean, you can do whatever you want to, but uh, why don't you introduce yourself, Charles? Introduce yourself and tell everybody where they can find you at, what's going on, and a little bit about your process.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. My name's Scott Connor at Charles Chill FFB. A lot of people do reach out to me and say, "Hey, Charles," but I do go by Scott. So I don't have it anywhere in my bio, so no one would know unless they've heard me on a show before. But yeah, I'm a host of Dynasty and Chill. A lot of other content. I do a YouTube channel called Trades in Five. It's a weekly show. We put out probably 4 to 5 videos a week. We live stream once a week, just talking about trades. Really interactive, really cool. Myself and Shane Manila do that along with the owner, I guess, of the brand, Clay Mosley. Shout out to both those guys. I write for DLF, do YouTube for DLF, host a show on Destination Devi as well called America's Game, and then just dropping guest spots and tweets whenever. But yeah, so I mean the portfolio approach. I think it's cool that you asked me to come on and talk about it because it really is the crux of where my advice is coming from, right? So I think it's important to when you see me say something or you see me tweet something, generally I'm coming at it from like my own lens, but it is coming at it from a portfolio approach. So I'm looking at the scope of probably I'm in almost 60 dynasty leagues. And every year I'm trying to add more and add more money into the pot as well. So like I'm trying to add more leagues at higher buy-ins every year as well. Because I'm trying to get as much money on the table and essentially just play this like if I can find an edge, and I think we'll get into some of the edges that I think still exist in the dynasty space. Yet they are shrinking a little bit, which is interesting. Over the last couple of years, they're definitely shrinking. But I'm playing it on a macro level. We'll get into like micro bets and macro bets, but basically, I'm coming at it from a portfolio approach, using the fact that we play fantasy football based on it's a numbers game, but it's also a sport that involves human beings. It involves how many different pieces coming together on a Sunday, a Thursday, a Saturday, whatever, to score fantasy points. There is a level of variance and unpredictability that all the analysis in the world, all of the information in the world, all of the projecting in the world, all the historical data that someone might tell you is predictive of what's going to happen next, we can't account for. Down to the point of like, okay, John, you have to pick between two players to put in your lineup on a Sunday. You might say, man, these wide receivers are the exact same guy. Their projections are the exact same for that day. Their quarterbacks are both really good. Their matchups are both really good. You can look at all that and you go, it's a 50-50 coin flip, right? But it's not really 50-50. There's probably things about each one of those players that there's no way either you or I can know. What if one of them's having a bad day? What if one of them just broke up with his girlfriend the night before? What if one of them is not feeling well? You know what I mean? There's so many
Yeah,
factors that we can't predict. It's almost arrogance to go out there and say, I know what's going to happen and I know what's going to happen at a better rate than you do. That's essentially what dynasty players that approach things like, I can pick better players than you. I can make better trades than you. I can run the waiver wire better than you. I mean, sure, you might be a little bit better than average, but to sit there and say that is your edge that is allow you to win leagues at a high rate over and over and over, and there's nobody else in the space that can match you. I think it is a little bit of it's a little bit of arrogance, right?
it's a
Like
big
it
time
just is.
arrogance. All of
Yeah.
us get in. We all started in one league at one time and got and dabbled into fantasy football. Writing on a board with a bunch of your friends, and then you jump to like your neighbor's league, and then you jump somewhere else, and you start being pretty good at this, and you like it more than everybody else. You have more time, you spend more effort in it, so you jump to bigger leagues, more competitive leagues with better players, better people, better opponents, and it just keeps growing and growing. And it goes from redraft to dynasty, and then dynasty to I'm in campus Canton leagues now, and all kind of stuff. And it makes a lot of sense the more people you have. I myself like having the players I like. I'm not at this level yet, so this system you have is intriguing to me. I brought you on today because it's I always want to find out more, and I want to get this from the base level so that listeners can understand like your process, because it's so impressive what you and Scott do, and Scott Sidlow and a bunch of other people who are. This trend is becoming more and more popular, and I feel like I'm learning on it on the grassroots level, but I'm sure it's been around for years now. Probably, I don't know how long it's been around for, but I'm just kind of new to the concept of it. So thanks for coming on today, and I really appreciate it. And let's dig into some of this stuff.
Yes, I mean, I think a good place to start is when you hear the term portfolio, you don't need 50 dynasty leagues. Okay. You don't need 60 dynasty leagues. I know a couple people that somehow have managed to play in over 200 dynasty leagues. And we're talking, I just joined my first best ball dynasty league in 2 years.
That
So
was my next question. This is not best ball. We're talking about like
every other league I'm in except for one, we're in the midst of doing it right now because and we'll get into best ball too. I used to play a lot of best ball dynasty and then I stopped because I'm like, I just didn't enjoy it. And part of it was it is so different when you play it the way that I want to play it from a lineup league that I kind of just pushed away from it. I don't want to say I wasn't playing it right, but I was just trying to follow my same process in best ball and it wasn't working. And so I'm like, you know what? I don't enjoy best ball. I dropped all my best ball leagues after 2020 and I'm just starting to get back into it. But I also acknowledge that as I start integrating best ball into my portfolio, best ball dynasty, that is, it is a little bit different. So we'll get into that too when you're looking at different formats. It's not just best ball versus lineup, but no, every one of my leagues except for this one that I'm starting right now are lineup leagues. And I'll just say that you have to be cognizant about not only how much money you have to put up, but how much time you have to put towards running 40 dynasty leagues that are lineup leagues. Because part of the edge that you lose, and you've probably known people that have gotten in over their heads with too many leagues, and it's like, oh, damn, I missed all those Thursday night starting lineups. I have a bye week player in there. I forgot to put this player in here. Forgot to put that guy on IR, and he got locked, and now I can't make any moves. Like things like that. You're losing a micro edge every time you cannot be on top of your lineups in
sure.
every one of your leagues. So you do have to do a self assessment going like, okay, how many can I handle? And how many can I afford? Where do I want to start? But you don't need to start at 40. You can start at, I think once you get to like 10 leagues, you can start treating it like a portfolio. And then Scott will tell you this, Scott Sidlow, who I've had on a couple times to talk about Portfolio Dynasty. Once you're in like 20 and you're dedicated, because you would agree, once you're in like 20 leagues, this is becoming like a second part of your life, right? You know, like you're
Absolutely.
following the news every day, you're in your chats every day. Like it is a daily part of your routine to be checking your leagues. So once you're in 20 and you can master 20 and you can get through 20, set the lineups every week, grind the waiver wires, work the rookie drafts, 25 is not that big of a difference. You know, going up a couple more is not that big of a change because there's a baseline level of what it takes to master 20. 22 and 20 is not that big of a difference. 95 or more percent of your investment is already a sunk overhead cost that you're having to put in to prepare for those 20. So then you can go to 22, you can go to 25, however you want to do it. So I think that's the first thing. Don't tune this out if you're only in 8 leagues. If you're somebody that wants to get into more leagues, you can start taking a portfolio approach once you get to like, I think, double figures.
Yeah.
But the most important thing to take away from it is some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. You want to know the logic and the math behind it. Doesn't mean you have to act on it. Because I'll get
Right.
people that come to me and say, hey, I have a question. What should I do in this scenario? If it was my team in 50 leagues, I'd be like, dude, that's a pure process move. Hit the accept button. But then they go, this is my home league. It's a $600 buy in. I have to win. This is my one move that I'm going to make. Okay, I'm going to look at that a little bit differently than if I have 50 of these moves that I'm going to make in the next week. If
Right.
I'm making 50 of them, I'm just going to take whatever one is the most advantageous from an odds perspective. If it's your one league and it's really important to you, I'm not going to necessarily criticize you for saying, I got a gut feeling. I know this doesn't make sense, but I got a gut feeling that I shouldn't do this trade or I shouldn't make this move. If that's the case, then as long as you understand that you're making a suboptimal bet and this is why, then go make whatever move you want. But that's where I could justify not using a portfolio strategy and just kind of taking a gamble.
I'm going to ask you this question that I got asked a lot, or I asked Scott about this stuff too, and I'll ask you now. When COVID was going on and there was so many last minute cancellations and stuff, how, because I see the people who like yourself who I'm in leagues with who have multiple leagues, what you'll see is like they'll take everybody out of lineup every week, completely get rid of everybody across. I don't know if you do this too, but it's a method that I see. I don't know if there's a reason for it, but one by one you'll start seeing when I'm playing Scott, I'll notice that he'll have his quarterbacks in, and that's it. And then he'll put like a running back in. So as news starts coming in throughout the week, he'll make sure that he slowly goes through all the lineups and puts this guy in who that's a matchup dependent guy, or this is they have a terrible defensive line. Their running defense is terrible. A lot of PPR back that's got no competition to backfield that week because of injuries, anything like that. But they piece together their lineup all week long, and then the very last day it'll be like the last 2 or 3 people finally when all the news comes out, injury reports come out, and you have all the information. Are you do you use that kind of simulator also, or like that process also?
I think you hit on the key word. I don't do it that exact way, but the key word is when you have a portfolio. I think the most important thing, you have to have a routine, you have to have a process, and you have to give yourself essentially the time pockets throughout the week to work through that process. So that's one of the first things you have to assess when you're going to jump into 20 leagues. If I'm going to do it right, I need to have a process that is set from the minute the new week starts. So I'm sure you've been up before on Monday night after the Monday night football game, waiting for the results to populate to the next day, right? Then it's like, okay, we have a new week now. Like once that hits, you got to have a process to go, okay, I'm starting a new week. We're starting brand new. Where do I start? And for me, I am Tuesday morning when I wake up. If I go to bed early, or even sometimes I'm a bad boy and I'll stay up too late and I'm up like till 4 in the morning looking at these things. But before we even get into anything, when the new week starts, I'm going through usually on Tuesday morning, and I am just literally going through and I will look at each lineup and just take like a 30-second cursory glance at each team. And this takes me, I can go to the gym in the morning and do an hour of cardio, and I can do all this while I'm doing that. I can kill two birds with one stone. I'll just go through and kind of set each lineup based on no information on this upcoming week. It could just be, okay, that looks good. Let's just put this guy in. Let's put this in. But I'll set a lineup that would make a little bit of sense right off the bat. That at least ensures me from having a lineup of players that I know are not on bye, players that I think are going to play, and then I can tweak that throughout. But that helps me never miss like a Thursday night lineup. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not tweaking on Thursday nights, but that sets the stages right there for I'm kind of ready for this week, and I'll literally go through and hit every single team. And that's the first thing I'll do. So that's part of the process is I don't do what you were talking about and pull everybody out. I'm actually setting my lineup for the first time like on Tuesday morning, and then I'll tweak it as we get further in the week. You're muted, John.
So you're sorry about that. You're putting you're making sure that your guys who are playing Thursday night are in their slot if that's who you plan on starting this week. You're not putting those guys on your Sunday or Monday night slots or somewhere you're going to forget about them. You're making sure that everybody who plays Thursday, who you're going to play, is in your lot. So that's your first step, right? Just make sure that those guys are not in your flex spots.
Yeah, so I guess to expand a little bit further, I'm going through if I see a player is playing Thursday night and there's a really good chance I'm going to put him in my lineup, I'll put him in that initial lineup. Yes.
He's in
The
there.
second thing, if there's a player that I know suffered an injury on Sunday and we're just like not sure what, I mean, the good thing is most of the time by Tuesday, we have a pretty good idea. Like Tuesday morning, we're getting immediate news. Like even after Sunday's games, we're getting news like Sunday night, Monday morning. Okay, this guy's going for an MRI, or it looks like this guy's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks. Like those kind of things, I can take those players out, even if they play a game next week. But yeah, I'm looking at, okay, let me get the Thursday night guys in, and any players that I'm pretty sure are going to be, the bad part now is everybody's questionable regardless of their status until the team removes them. And the team has no incentive to pull a player from a game or say he's not traveling with the team. They have no incentive to announce that until Saturday night at midnight. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Don't show your cards. Right. Yeah.
Right. So I'll usually say, okay, I know this guy probably has a sprained MCL or something. He's going to be out a couple weeks. I'll take that player out. I'll put the Thursday night players in, and then I'll work backwards from there based on the information that we get. And I track all this. And there's different tools out there that you can use. Dynasty Planet is one that a lot of people use. I track everything on a spreadsheet. It's just simple. I'm pretty good with Excel and pretty good with spreadsheets. So I'll go through and just I submit a lineup, I'll copy and paste it in the spreadsheet. And I have a formula set up to basically tell me, okay, at any point, I can tell you, and I go through, like, again, this is the second part of the process. I'll go through on like Thursday afternoon,
Hmm.
and I'll look at all my lineups and go, okay, Thursday night players specifically. So let's say it's Broncos Raiders on Thursday night. I'll go through and I look at all my teams and I go, who do I have playing in that game? And it's only two teams. So pretty much if there's two teams, I can name what 6 to 8 fantasy relevant players you might have in a given game if it's two
Sure.
teams. Where do I have exposure to those 8 players? And I'll be able to look on a spreadsheet on Thursday night and go, okay, I have Josh Jacobs starting in 7 leagues. I got Jerry Jeudy starting in 8 leagues. I got Russell Wilson in 6, Derek Carr in 5. And I have it tracked. So at any point after Thursday, once I start that process on Thursday night, I can go in and say, okay, I just saw this player got ruled out. Okay, I have him in 10 lineups. I go immediately, where do I have those players? I just pull them right out of the lineup. So it's systematic. Now that you mentioned the COVID thing, and that was a
Disaster.
nightmare because it was like these things times 5. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
constantly, oh, hey, this guy's locked into smash, top 12 receiver this week, Saturday afternoon, tested positive for COVID. He's out for 5 days. You know, things like that was, I'm going to be glad to get away from that. But I also, John, saw that as an edge because how many times in the last couple of years did you go and look at your lineup on Sunday and you're like, oh, that guy has COVID. The other guy has him in his lineup. You know what I mean? Like there were a lot of mistakes that were made by other people. So I figured this was actually an edge that I could gain
Okay.
during COVID season if I stay on top of it. But yeah, I'm going to be hoping that that stuff goes away and we're back to like the normal, you get information clarity by like Friday on most players.
Hmm. Now, my next biggest problem that I have with most teams is that at one point in time, I was on MFL and Sleeper and Yahoo and ESPN and everything else. Like, switching back, and the problem was I could not go to like a football. I don't go to football games on Sundays because it's too much stuff going on. I only go on Thursday nights or Sunday night or Monday night football games. It's the only time I go because it's just too much of a hassle. I'm only in 10 dynasty leagues and like the fish bowls. A couple other. Most of my stuff's home leagues, and then like the fish bowl, a couple other ones that I charity leagues I'm in every year that are redraft. But it's a pain in the butt. And sometimes you go to stadiums, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no stuff like that. How do you set that many lineups for 8? I don't know how many different host sites you have, but how do you manage that too?
Well, I think you nailed a good point. I refuse to go to anything on Sundays.
Okay.
Sundays is, if you're in this many leagues, you have to have a couple hours before the games start on Sunday to take a 2 or 3 minute look at every league. You just have to. You know,
Yes.
unfortunately we don't get the inactives on Sundays until 11:30 Eastern, so it's like
Mhm.
an hour and a half before the games. And how many times have you go, oh, that guy was supposed to play, and then he's a surprise scratch, and you're like, okay, I got to take him out. I got to go through, every one of my leagues, not just my dynasty leagues. I actually play in another 40 plus high stakes redraft leagues.
Phew.
And so it's like I'm setting between my dynasty, my high stakes redraft, my home leagues. We're all in different types of leagues, that I want to win every one of them, regardless of
Sure.
whether they're $10 buy-ins or $1,000 buy-ins or $5,000 buy-ins.
That's why we play.
I'm competitive. So like you don't understand how much I get like pissed if I miss an inactive player and it's
Yeah.
locks, things like that irk me. But Sundays have to be free. Like you got to give yourself 3 or 4 hours on Sundays, maybe a couple before the games start. And then the worst is like midway through the first set of games. And then they announce the inactives for the later games. And you're like, man, this is the best. This is the best. This is the second half of all the games that are on. But now I have to get on my phone and start checking every one of my lineups. So there
Right.
is some effort that goes into it. I'll say this. Co-managers are a good thing.
Okay.
I co-manage about 15 of my dynasty leagues, so about 25% of them. And then I co-manage almost all of my high stakes redraft teams. So I at least have another degenerate like me that is including all of our leagues in their portfolio. So we have at least two eyes, on these lineups at all times. So there's
That
been times where it's like, dude, we haven't set this lineup. It's 12:40. We have 20 minutes. Like, what are we doing? And I'm like, well, I'm glad you caught that, because I might have been one like I'm scrambling to get to at the last minute and would just made a decision on the fly. So co-managers are good. But again, it goes back to having a process, man. If you're going to join 20 plus leagues, you got to know this time is coming for 17 weeks, at least
I
14 weeks. And you got to you cannot, like, there are times we have a couple trips scheduled this year where it's like my wife and I are going out of town, and I know we're going to be like driving back somewhere on a Sunday morning, and I'm going like, we're either leaving after 1 o'clock or we're leaving at like 9 a.m. You know what I mean? Like, you
right.
have to put that in. You can't, I couldn't just be like, oh, I don't have service for a week. No, I mean, it's just not in the cards. So there is some stuff you have to give up to play this way for sure.
How do you find a co-manager that does that many leagues that you see eye to eye on your lineup decisions?
That's a great question. So I have two co-managers. One of my co-managers is my co-host on the Destination Devy Pod, Eric Vanek. He's a portfolio player. He's in over 40 dynasty leagues. We do co-manage some high stakes leagues together, but he is another. I mean, I hate to say it, he's another degenerate that I know every Sunday morning he's going to be on his computer. He's going to be available. Like, there's not going to be really anything else that takes precedent. And then my partner in high stakes, Jay Reed, shout out to Jay. He's been a high stakes pro for 20 plus years. So you obviously have to find people that also have this understanding with their significant others and their kids. You know what I mean? Like, this is my time, and it is a priority. Because if you're going to say, okay, I want to be a portfolio player, I want to play in a high volume or number of leagues, you're doing yourself a disservice if every other weekend it's going to be, oh, I couldn't get to my lineups, forgot to put that player in. I don't have any time to trade or any time to do waivers. It's like, you got to reevaluate what you want to do. You know what I mean? I'm not
Sure.
not judging you, but I've known some people that have been in 40 plus leagues, and then they go, I can't handle more than 10. It's like, well, you got to reassess. You know what I mean? What your goals
Right.
are here.
You have this is we're doing this for fun. I understand we're trying to make money on it too, but in reality, like you said, you're competitive. You have to have fun being, you have to enjoy winning. You have to enjoy the
Yep.
thrill of like, yes, I'm doing all this. And look at this, win, 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 win. I mean, you just start getting woody. You're like, yes, like this week went awesome. Like, that's the best part of it. But that goes down to your process that drives me nuts because, like I think I mentioned it in a pre-show that sometimes you draft guys you don't even want to draft just to have this certain amount of, you know, certain amount of a percentage of a player that you may not even like, but just so you own him a little bit. And I'm talking like Scott drafted Christian Watson at like 111 this year, and he's like, oh, I hate this guy. Like, that doesn't compute in my head. Like, I would have took somebody else. I would have took anybody else in a rookie draft besides guys I don't like, just because you don't have exposure. That's kind of that process kills me. So when you do draft players, like we had talked pre-show about you taking, like I would have 100% of Patrick Mahomes across the board. It is what it is. If all my leagues are super flex, tight end premium, 30-man rosters, 10 or 11 starters most of the time. So two running backs, three wide receivers, tight end, a couple flexes, that kind of stuff. How do you like? People get pissed off when they're only in like two or three leagues and they're playing against, oh, I got Keenan Allen playing in this league, but I'm playing against Keenan Allen in that league. How long did it take for you to swallow saying, I don't give a shit. It's all about money. It's all about money. It's all about money. It's all about money. If I'm losing, if I lose, people are like, I need Keenan Allen to get 7 catches for 82 yards and only one touchdown this week, like, or I'm going to lose that week. And but how do you justify, or how do you see which league's more important than the other ones?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because there is a level of uh, player a player agnostic approach that I take, where it's literally I am so zoomed out from sitting there and saying like I'm going to pick players because they're my favorite players or because I want to root for them. I am so disconnected from that. Not certainly, I mean, I enjoy watching players. I have my favorite teams, my favorite players, but I've literally zoomed out entirely to where that is completely disconnected from my dynasty process. Now, I may really like a player, but it's probably for a reason of how they're helping my portfolio or how they're helping my teams or what their market value is. Why do I want to overexpose myself to this asset? Well, maybe it's because what it costs to acquire gives me a lot of upside to maybe flip it for more value later. So there isn't really like I'm sitting here saying this is my favorite player or I have a rooting interest, so I'm going to go down that road. So I'll explain it this way. We talked about it at the beginning, where I don't necessarily think that is an edge to have favorite players, to be able to say I can pick players better than you, to say that I can trade better than you. Honestly, I mean, let's be real. If you're in Dynasty, a lot of times the biggest edge you have over others, you're not playing against someone else's fantasy team. You're playing against the other people in the league. If you
Right.
could master psychologically the other 11 people in your league, you could know absolutely nothing about football. But if someone just told you, okay, this is better than that, and you figured out a way to manipulate everybody else into always giving you this side over that side, you would win by default, right? Like you would just win by, if I just told you, like picture it this way. Let's say I just told you you're going to go in 50 leagues tomorrow, John. And for the first year, every one of those leagues, you have to make 20 trades and you have to win every one of those trades. Forget about what players you're getting. Forget about what type of roster construction you have. Forget about what positions those players have. All you're going to do is accumulate more value than everybody by the end of the first season. Now you have a portfolio where you have the highest valued rosters. Now you can look at it and go, okay, now all I have to do is go and tweak the different spots where maybe I have 8 quarterbacks in this league. Maybe I have 17 wide receivers in this league. Maybe this league I have every first round pick in the next 2 years. All you got to do is kind of move those pieces around based on the format and align them ideally based on, whatever the format warrants. But you're going to have an advantage by all you have to do is just play those 50 leagues out. You're going to, by default, you're going to win more than everybody else in your league across the board. And that even includes some of the variants that we haven't been able to account for that we were talking about earlier. So I'm looking at it like from just like that type of approach where once you kind of zoom out and you figure, okay, I'm just trying to accumulate value. I'm trying to make trades in areas. And this is a big thing that I think a lot of people don't think about Dynasty this way. And I'm able to do it because I don't care about the players. Have you heard of the term WAR or WARP before? Wins over
Yeah.
replacement or wins above replacement?
I hear you talking about it a lot, and I hear Shane talking about it on that in the trade thing a couple times too. So yes, I am. Yeah.
Yes. So one thing that we can always do, and I'm actually working on a tool that anybody can use based on historical data. But it's essentially figuring out, like, you could just sit here and tell me, here's my league. It is a 12-team super flex with 11 starters and 30 roster spots. Here are the starting lineup requirements. Here's the scoring. It's PPR. It's 1.75 tight end premium. This is the quarterback scoring. These are some of the other scoring nuances. Once you've told me all of that, I kind of have like a math equation that all I have to do now is solve for the variables. And the variables are the players, but I don't have to actually nail the perfect specific players. What I need to nail is how do I take that math equation and give myself the best chance to solve for those variables without putting players in there. And usually that's in the form of, okay, I'll give you an example. If you're in a league where you have to, it's a 12-team super flex with 10 starters. You have to start 3 receivers, a super flex, and then 2 flexes, right? So it's 3 receivers and 2 flexes. We're using receivers as an example. So you can start 5 receivers at any point every week, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually calculate that based on historical data. Forget about what the current dynasty values are or the current ADP. Just
Sure.
based on historical data, there is a calculation that you can go, okay, based on historical data, it is optimal to always have a wide receiver in the flex in that format. Always. That is
Yep.
the dominant strategy. Over time, over like the last 5 years, it's about 60%.
Yeah.
So if 60% of the time, if you just used like optimal scoring, a wide receiver is in that flex. So I sit there and go, okay, I need to have 5 receivers every single week to cover those flexes. Then I have to account for the fact that, okay, maybe there are going to be some injury variants, some bye weeks, and then I'm limited by the number of roster spots I have too. Let's say I have 20 bench spots. That gives me a target number of this is how many receivers I want to have. this is the threshold of how far I want to go into the dynasty player pool. Once I've drawn that line, I never want a receiver that is beyond that player pool. So that is a steadfast rule that I will calculate. And I literally will not take a receiver that is outside of that range unless I can justify that I can flip it for more value.
Yep.
So,
I'd be saying the top 80 receivers are the only people you go after. That's that. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
and it could be top 80, it could be top 70, top 60, whatever it is, and you can do these types of calculations, and you don't have to be perfect. You do not have to be like, okay, well, Scott, what if it's top 80, but really it's top 70? It's the thought process that you're thinking about it this way, and you're not just haphazardly going into next year with no plan. So like you already know some things. If you kind of play with me in enough leagues or you listen to me over time, you kind of already know like what I'm going to do with the waiver wire. What am I going to do in a startup draft? What am I going to do with my rookie picks? Like one thing I'm not doing with rookie picks is drafting the round 7 receiver that's the number 5 guy on the Vikings. You know, like that player, the odds that they ever fit into this top 60, 70 threshold is so low, it's a wasted pick.
Amir Smith-Marset, come on, man, get off my
I,
guy.
but okay, now I'll give you an exception though. There are times where you can come to me and go, okay, Romeo Dubs, for instance, right? Like if you want to sell me to why you should draft him in the 3rd round of your rookie draft 3 months ago, you can at least give me some things where you could explain how, okay, I'm pretty sure Romeo Dubs may never crack the top 50 receivers in Dynasty, or he may never produce in that range. But there might be a small window where I can turn that 305 pick that I used on him into 2 third-round picks in 3 months.
Right.
And if just acknowledge that's why you're drafting him. You're not drafting him to ever go in your lineup. Because the other thing is, if you're in lineup leagues, how many times have you run into times on your own rosters where you go, well, man, I got 15 receivers on this roster. I got to play 4. And there's 9 of them that I could play. And you're trying to guess which one is going to go off for 20 points. And how many times have you started the guy that gets 8 points and then on your bench you're kicking yourself because the other guy scores 22?
Oh, that happens all the time to me. Yeah.
All the time. And that's going to happen even to me. But one way to eliminate decisions like that is literally don't put yourself in that position with your roster construction.
Okay.
So for instance, mine is like, okay, I call it the wide receiver threshold. Before I even get into a league, I calculate roughly where this range is. Let's say it's wide receiver 70. I can justify taking a top 70 dynasty receiver or like a top 70 receiver redraft wise that I could maybe say, okay, this guy's 31 years old, but he might give me 1 season of top 60 production. And then you just kind of narrow it in a little bit. I don't really want to always have wide receiver 60 through 70. I probably want to be a little higher because I want to have good players. So you just zone in on this range and you go, okay, this is ideally how I want to build. And I want to get 9 receivers in this range. And that's my priority. And it's the same thing with running backs. It's usually the opposite with running backs for me. I go, okay, I have 9 receivers. I stopped. I'm not picking anymore. I'm not trading for anymore. Not drafting anymore. What do I use all the rest of my roster spots on? Probably running backs. Just because I got to fill 30 roster spots, right? So I'm going to use the extra picks on running backs. And so you can kind of afford to take the volume approach at those positions. Because I think everyone would realize that during a week in the fantasy season, it's a lot easier to peg which running backs to start, generally, right?
Sure.
It's easier to pick out what running back 3 could be an RB2 on the week than which wide receiver 5 is going to have a wide receiver 3 week. I think we'd all acknowledge the running backs are easier to project. So then it's the opposite. It's okay, if I can, and we get back to the warp idea. So I'll give you another example. I know I'm being long-winded on this, but it's important to think about this way. So historically, when you get about to RB9 in a given year, we're talking maybe around 15 points per game or so.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between that and the running back you pull off the bench who's going to get a spot start, we're talking about such minimal impact on your overall yearly win total, less than a half a win per year. Now, but if I told you you can trade, give me an example of like a low-end RB1 or high-end RB2 that comes to mind when you think of that
Let's
name?
say that was the next question. Like, let's just say if you had a difference between Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler or something like that. Guys who catch the ball, guys who don't catch the ball. Mainly speaking, like, where do you? Obviously, you're always going to put in a guy who has the tendency or the possibility of scoring a rushing touchdown and a couple the screen pass to turn into a 60-yard touchdown, or even
Yep.
a screen pass outside that turns into a 3-yard out to the corner of the end zone, and the guy's got he's got 2 touchdowns. Yeah, and most things are PPR 1 point, 1 full point now. So you're looking at Chubb's not going to have that kind of upside to get that he does a lot of long runs, but he does not have that PPR upside that an Austin Eckler or somebody like that would have.
Yeah, and Nick Chubb's a perfect example. So Nick Chubb for his career, because I've done a deep dive on a lot of these running backs, just to kind of highlight to people, listen, Nick Chubb is a great real life player. For his career, he averages about 15.1 points per game for his career. And he's never had a season over 18 fantasy points per game. So I think we know what he is. So here's the example with Nick Chubb. If I just told you for his entire career he averages 15.1 points per game, maybe he runs really hot for a month. Maybe he runs really hot for a year and he scores 17.5 points per game. That's like the best case scenario for him.
Sure.
But I think we have enough of a sample size to go, okay, I can plug Nick Chubb in my lineup this year for 15 points per game. But what does that mean historically to impact my lineup? And really what it says is, okay, Nick Chubb is a really good running back, but his ceiling is capped and he fits into this, like, you've heard the running back dead zone, right?
Yes. Yep.
Like he fits right above the running back dead zone. But if I told you you can get running back 10 prices for Nick Chubb in a trade, and you can also pick up 5 running backs for free that will give you 1 or 2 shots to score 14 points per game throughout the year. Dirt free. We're talking about pick a Matt Breida off waivers.
But they're not free because they cost you roster spots, though.
They cost me now, and that's the important thing. You have to set your team up to play this way to make sure you are not wasting roster spots on extra receivers. You're not wasting roster spots on extra tight ends in certain formats. You have your quarterbacks dialed in to where, okay, I'm not carrying 7 or 8 backup quarterbacks because my first 2 starting quarterbacks are garbage, and I'm just desperate to have bodies in there. So you have, it's give or take with all the positions. But if you set it up where you go into it and you go, okay, I got a couple stud quarterbacks. I got this like threshold worth of wide receivers. It's a big group of guys that at any given week could score me 25 points. Maybe their bad week is 8 points, 10 points. But you're just going to throw the best 5 in every week, and you're always going to have like 8 or 9 to pull from.
Sure.
You can afford to basically say, okay, I have 15 roster spots dedicated to tight end, wide receiver, and quarterback. The other 15 are running backs. That widens my net to go, I'm going to probably hit on, and especially if you kind of get these guys when they're cheaper and not, you don't want to be the guy that's paying 2 seconds to buy the Alexander Madison the week he's starting. You know what I mean? You want to have those guys in the pipeline when they're cheaper, when people don't maybe see that they're going to be the next man up right away. So it gets into whole, strategy on how to use your rookie picks and stuff like that.
You want Jerome Ford.
Exactly. But and I think the idea is because people are willing to always value these running backs that have this safe workload. Essentially, if you're paying for Nick Chubb in Dynasty, you are paying for convenience, security, predictability. You don't have to worry about finding a guy that week. You can just kind of live stress-free as long as he's healthy. You put him in your lineup every week. But I did an exercise on our Patreon channel, and I go, David Montgomery and Josh Jacobs, the last 3 years, are the prototypical examples of this. Can you guess how many times last year David Montgomery and Josh Jacobs combined? And they were both over the 14 points per game, which is like the median threshold for replacement value.
Sure.
How many times did they hit over that number combined last season? Just take a guess. And they both played, I believe, one played 14 games and one played 16 games. I think Montgomery, actually, one of them might have played even more. But anyway, how many times total did they hit that number?
4.
So it was more. It was 11.
Right.
But I think it ended up being like 11 out of 24 games or something like that, right? Now, that's good. But I'm sitting here going like, what premium did I pay for those guys? For what boiled down to be 11 games above or at replacement value. And so you're going, okay, if I can find 4 or 5 of those weeks for literally nothing, that's the perfect range where you'd go, okay, if I can pivot off one of these guys while they still have value, that's where you start looking at these pivot down trades where you're getting 2-for-1s, where you're getting maybe a lesser player in the same tier. What's the difference between Nick Chubb and Ezekiel Elliott? It's probably not a lot of difference. As long as
Right.
they both are playing, they're probably pretty similar. Yet one probably has more value than the other. So just always finding those angles. And here's the other thing that no one really thinks about. If you had Nick Chubb and Josh Jacobs in your backfield, you probably started those guys every single week they were
Every
healthy, right?
week.
Just blindly. Nick Chubb's my stud. I put him in, right? David Montgomery's, he's going to get 20 touches. I put him in. So, yeah, they gave you the 11 weeks. But how many weeks did they give you where you're going, how the hell did this guy finish with less points than Zach Moss? You know what I mean? And the way
Right.
I build my teams is not only am I not taking on those 13 weeks that they didn't hit the replacement level number, I'm actually more likely to have the Zach Mosses in my lineup because I don't have anybody else. You know what I mean? So you're kind of gaining a little bit of an advantage back in both ways. You're not just locked and loading your RB2s, which is a dead zone range to begin with, but I'm desperately searching week to week for a guy that I think could just match the other team's RB2s. And you can do that with your own roster construction, but you can also do that. I mean, you're in 10 dynasty leagues, right?
Yep.
How many times last year during the season did somebody that had some extra running backs on their bench in a random week go, "Hey, anybody want Alex Collins for a third round pick?" Did you see that a couple times in your leagues?
When he had like one decent week one week, and everybody, yeah, try to sell him. I send out like
Or
50 trades a week, so I'm maybe the rarity, the exception to rule or
or
something.
the
But
week where, let's say you go to set your lineup and you go, "Oh, I got lucky this week. I got Darrell Williams on my bench. I got Mark Ingram on my bench. I don't need him because I'm rolling out, you know, Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb. He's not going in my lineup. Maybe let me try to trade him." You see that all the time. And it's a product of other people have these backups on their roster and they think they're gaining the edge by getting those third and fourth round picks to sell for the spot start. And I'm sitting here going, I'm zagging. I'm the one guy in the league that's going, "Oh, you want a third for Alex Collins? Sure. I'll start him this week." And how do I accumulate those extra thirds? It's in the off season. I'm selling my 305 on the clock for 2 future thirds. I'm selling these receivers like Laviska Shenault or Brian Edwards or Paris Campbell. Sure, give me 2/3 for those guys. Because really they're outside of my threshold of what I want anyway. So that's kind of the theory behind it. I know that was a lot of stuff at once, but it's kind of preying on the fact that other people I know how they're going to play Dynasty, and
hmm
it's going to give me an edge because I'm maybe I'm the one or two people in the league that's playing the opposite, which means the trade market's going to be available because generally people are always going, "Oh, sell high, sell high, sell high" on these weekly players that are going to spot start. And I'm like, sure, I'll buy those guys. Because again, the value of I getting one start where I can get 15 touches from Jamal Williams and he can score me 14 points, I have just matched one of your 5 David Montgomery weeks right there. And I did it at a fraction of the cost of probably what you paid for a guy like David Montgomery, if that makes
hmm
sense.
Yeah, it does. I just traded Donovan Peoples Jones and Amari Cooper for a third round pick like a couple days ago in the roster cut time, and it's like it's free money as far as I'm concerned. We already know what Donovan Peoples Jones is. As far as I'm concerned, I know what he is. He's not going to be anything more than a best ball guy once in a while or something like that. And Amari, Amari Rogers is the other guy that I think we all know that he's never going to be anything. That he's kind of, I mean, getting 6 plays is for a rookie year. The kind of writing's on the wall with what they brought in. So, um, I, I, I guess what kills me is that playing football. Did you play football growing up? Did you play football, or are you kind of like?
I played growing up and then stopped like in high school.
Yeah, I went through high school, played a little in college, and it's enjoying the game of football so much. I don't want to just like I don't want to put my fantasy on autopilot. I enjoy the game, and it's like I don't want like you're talking about this your app where it does it. It's awesome. If I want to win, you better believe I'm getting it. I'm just I'm going to buy it. I'm going to because it'll give me such an edge. But I at the same time people that played football their whole life and just enjoyed the running back position and watch a play develop on the field, like that kind of stuff. It's hard to swallow that this is what fantasy football is becoming, but it is. And if I don't keep with the trends and get with these apps that, I mean, when you described it, I'm like, that's fucking cheating, man. That's it's bullshit. But at the same time, it is what it is. It's because you guys have evolved past us already. That's the only difference.
Well, and I'm gonna say this with the most respect possible. It is a space where, I mean, how long have you been playing Dynasty? Just offhand, how long have you been playing
Dynasty only
Dynasty?
about 7 years. I've been playing redraft for since 1997 ish.
Yeah.
I'm more of a redraft guy, but I've only been in a dynasty for less than a decade anyway. And it's so as much as I think I figured everything out, I realize being naive, I realize I haven't figured anything out yet. That kind of stuff.
Well,
So
I don't think you're naive. This is only my ninth year of playing Dynasty, and it's really only like my fifth year of playing kind of like a portfolio approach. The first few years, I was the same as most people, getting in a couple leagues. I was probably getting my information from one or two sources, one or two websites that I was subscribed to. That was really before podcasts became like, I mean, there's so many podcasts now. It's like you can't even keep up. But there was probably a couple podcasts that I listened to, and they were some of the most basic ones that really weren't giving dynasty advice. It was kind of like, okay, we're going to
football
give you
stuff, yeah.
some fantasy football advice, and then you take. My early dynasty career was like, okay, if this guy's really young and he's good now, like I can put two and two together and say that's probably a good dynasty player. But we are so saturated in this space with data that there isn't an edge anymore in just knowing more than your league mates. There
Right.
isn't an edge in saying, oh, I listened to that podcast and nobody in my league did. Let me go try to work my the rest of my league mates because they don't know. Like I would guess if you're in a dynasty league and you're in a dynasty league that's even semi-competitive, especially if you're in some leagues where, it's 100, 200, 400, $500 buy-in, you really think those guys don't have their phones on them all the time and getting sleeper alerts and listening to podcasts and consuming content? There is no edge in saying, I know the news and you don't. So to think that that is an edge is out the window. The edge is being able to read your league mates, and it takes all kinds in leagues. That's one of the reasons I like to be in leagues with a wide variety of different people. Because I sit here, I may have this process dialed in. I may be to the point where I'm able to start teaching other people the process. But someone asked me a question on a podcast like 2 years ago, and they go, how would you beat yourself if you were playing with 11 other people exactly like you? And and we're talking 11 other people that are looking at this going, okay, every move I have to make has to be odds in my favor. Best range of outcomes is on my side. Completely lacking emotion. It's just what is the most optimal decision to make at all times. But what if I was in a league with 11 other people that were doing that exact same thing? I wouldn't really have an edge doing that anymore, right? The edge would be
Zero.
let me go play more like John and actually zig when everyone else is doing something that way. So I think that is where it's a fun process. Is sure, my strategy may work now as a portfolio, but how do we know in 10, I mean, don't you think in 10 years almost everybody in dynasty is going to have some sort of app that's just telling them what to do? You know what I mean?
Oh, I was at the expo last weekend, and like the Yizzer, what's his name, Yizzer, and the kid, the other, geez, I don't know why I'm blanking on his name right now. These kids are 18, 19, you know, 20 years old, 17 years old at the expo with their parents because they can't get a hotel by themselves. They're that young, and they are killing it already. I see their TikToks. I see their stuff. It is unbelievable how far. The difference is, like myself, I work construction. I don't have access to a laptop or a computer. I never learned. I had a typewriter in high school. I don't know how to use Google Sheets and stuff like that yet. And I'm just getting buried by the people that have the information already. And it sucks that I was raised in that generation or that time frame when now it's secondhand to use a computer and use Google Sheets and Trend and equals all that, have this coding and stuff on there now. I'm so glad these kids are doing it. It makes me happy that they've evolved that much from what I did my whole life. But at the same time, I'm jealous but I'm happy. I love to see these kids just blowing past everybody else already at that age. Already having a place in the fantasy football community. It's just amazing, and I'm happy for him.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm almost 40 myself, so I'm relating more to your end of it. Like I didn't grow up with this, and honestly, I'm fairly tech savvy, but I'm they blow me out of the water. You know what I mean? There's people out there that can do what I'm trying to do manually. Sometimes they can do something in 2 minutes that it takes me to do an hour. You know what I
Yes,
mean? So like
I know
from
exactly
an
what you mean.
efficiency perspective, I don't even have an edge like saying, okay, I'm more efficient than you. So I have to find other ways to be efficient. And that's one of the other scary things. It's like my ideas are in my brain, but I don't have the capability always to actually come up with the tool. I need to rely on other people to say, okay, I've gone to people before and I'm like, dude, you're smarter than me. You can help me program this stuff. I can tell you what's in my brain,
Hmm.
but I don't have the capacity to be able to develop this tool or develop this app or do this quickly enough to where, I mean, yeah, I can sit here and say all day how I want to automate everything. But if I'm spending 15 hours a week updating my spreadsheet manually, I'm getting my ass kicked by somebody that has a process that just goes, oh, I, I, I
Minutes.
changed it on Sleeper and it updated on my Google Sheet within 2 seconds. You know what I mean? Like they're
It's it,
killing me from
it's like
just an efficiency perspective.
it's like me drawing a beautiful peacock on a piece of paper and having an artist do it and tell him what I want to draw, and they just do it to a perfection.
Hmm.
And it took me 3 times as long, and it looks like shit. So
Yep.
yeah, I get it. It's 100%. How do you like how do you know like what kind of caps to put on your your rookies, your picks, your wide receivers? How do you know like how many is too many? How do you know like where that value's at? Like what's your threshold for this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So this is a great question, and I will give you what my personal thresholds are, but I can't say for sure this is optimal because I've talked to other people and they are different than me, and they've given reasons why I go, okay, yeah, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes. I've kind of always operated under the fact that I don't want to have more than 25% of a very risky high end asset, not because Patrick Mahomes is risky of like losing his job, or I think we pretty much know he's pretty damn good for as long as he's going to play. So like there's no risk there with like he's going to get worse, his value is going to go down to zero, it's going to get cut in half. It's just the random amount of variance that we come into with injuries, players missing games, all of that kind of stuff. But there's been people that have go, when you're talking about the most valuable assets in Dynasty, usually like the real high end quarterbacks, guys like Kyle Pitts, things like that, like people have said there is no limit. I'll go 50,
Right.
70% on those because I'm always holding the gold and silver bars. They're always going to be commodities. Maybe they're worth twice now what they would be if they tore an ACL, but they're not going down to zero. And there's going to be an easy path for them to bounce back. So I have kind of thought a little more about, okay, maybe I should be a little more liberal with my exposure on like the really high end quarterbacks or the super insulated assets where even if something negative happens to a guy like Kyle Pitts this year, say he starts off slow and then has a season ending injury, I'm going to have a long ramp to take in more information, take in another off season, and still probably retain like 95% of his current value. So like in those levels of assets, I can probably justify, okay, maybe I should go a little bit higher than what I do. But I typically go like 25% ish on the high end blue chip assets that are not running backs. And with the caveats of, I think the current dynasty market actually lends towards you want the running backs when you can get them in the rookie drafts.
Yes.
After you've used them for literally a year or two, that's when you want to sell. You want to sell like Jonathan Taylor right now if I can get Brees Hall in a future first. And then you know what? If Jonathan Taylor somehow becomes the next Ezekiel Elliott, where he is still kicking strong in year 6 or year 7, what am I going to be able to do based on historical behaviors at that point? I'm going to be able to buy back in because that's when everybody else is going, man, this guy's just going to fall off a cliff any given week. You know what I mean?
So
And
the
that's what
opposite
the
for
current market says.
the flip side of that is you have the chance to buy Trevor Lawrence at his low value right now. You have a chance to get Antonio Gibson at their low value right now. Everybody is like, they see these reports coming out like, oh my God, he's on the punt team now. He's never played. We all know he's still going to get his opportunities, Like, but people are selling him like he's going to be a special teams player, and that's it. Like, so you wouldn't get maximum exposure right now. People trying to sell lower, taking a third round pick, or even worse for a guy like Antonio Gibson right now, if you had a chance, or Trevor Lawrence.
No, so Gibson is one of those guys where I started selling Gibson last year, and now it's gotten to the point where he is down to a point where now he is one of those, I don't even care if he's a backup. I'm willing to buy him at the backup price because you know what? This is a guy that is a size speed freak, has a
Yes.
300 touch season on his resume. If I have to pay a second rounder to get Antonio Gibson, if all he does is start 4 times on my dynasty team for the next 2 years, I have now gained more value than that second round pick.
Right.
And that's all. I'm not even thinking he's ever going to be back to a top 15 running back in dynasty. He's probably not. There's probably parts about his game that we've seen multiple coaching staffs now, or multiple coordinators and the same coaching staff have continually said,
he fumbles.
This guy ain't it. He is not like a guy we're going to continue to give more and more and more work. He's not going to become Christian McCaffrey like people thought he would be a year or two ago.
Sure.
But I've accepted that. I've accepted that now he is, here's who he is basically. He's a better version of like Darrell Henderson. But you know what? Darrell Henderson's a guy I want on every roster if I can get him for less than a second.
Sure.
Because all I need him for my teams is to start a couple times over the course of the rest of his dynasty career. And that's it. And that's the same with, this year. This was a crappy running back class this year, right? According to everybody.
Yeah. 2 good running backs. The rest are all nobodies, but they're all starting to come out of the woodwork now and show you.
But then you're sitting here going, ooh, I like Tyler. I like Ty Chandler. I like Jerome Ford. You know what? All of these guys were available for 3rd, 4th round picks. The only expectation I ever had if I drafted Tyler Algier in the late 2nd of my rookie draft was that he gives me a couple spot starts in his rookie contract. He becomes basically like, I don't know, Jamal Williams when he was on the Packers, or he becomes Alexander Madison. That is the expectation. And a lot of people will go, oh, I'm going to fade a guy like Jerome Ford because he's never going to be the guy. If you're thinking a 5th round running back is going to become the guy at any point, you're evaluating it wrong. And
right.
And you should never be looking at your late 2nd, 3rd, 4th round rookie picks of ever hitting on the guy. And I'll quote this. Analytics of Dynasty 2020, Jordan McNamara, shout out to him. He published a study over the first 3 years of rookie picks and what their value is in WARP. Okay. And if you look at this graph, I would show you this graph, John. And historically, the 206, how many wins above league average? So we're talking about dead center. How many wins above league average did the 206 give you over the first 3 years of that person's career? How many wins above replacement in the first 3 years? So total. Pick a number.
First 3 years. So we're talking, 15, 30, 40.
Like how many, by having that pick instead of a roster spot open, how many extra wins did that give you to your dynasty team above like the league average? And we use the league average because in a 12-team leagues, a lot of times like the top 6 teams make the playoffs. So that's like a decent baseline to say if I can get above league average, I'll kind of operate with that and then go from there. But over the first 3 years, how many wins did that 206 on average add to my roster over 3 years?
The way you're selling that, I'm going to say like 3 or 4 or something pretty low.
Way lower. Less than a half a win.
Get out of here.
Less than a half a win.
Mid-second round pick?
Mid-second round pick. So it's right around like the 206 to the 212 is right when it starts to get down below half a win. When you get to the 306, it actually dips below 0. And what that means is basically if you are rostering players that you picked in the 4th round, it is actually more advantageous to just not even pick the pick and have the free roster spot so that you can pick up 15 different players on waivers over 15 weeks. So when I read that data back in 2020 and I've been looking at it a little bit more, I'm sitting here going like, first of all, we are way too arrogant when we look at these day 3 running backs and we're going, I don't want to draft that guy. I don't want to draft Tyler Beatty because you know what? He's too small. He's never going to be a stud. I go, the fact that that's even in your thought that you want him to turn into a stud and you're comparing him to the 1 out of 100 players that had his size speed profile, and you go, if Tyler Beatty isn't Christian McCaffrey, he's not even worth drafting. I'm like, okay, well, your expectation is putting you in a place where you're going to shy away from a player like that. I go, okay, I'll take him at the 402 because he's a running back. Literally, all he needs to do is be in my lineup like 2 times in his career, and he has exceeded the value of that 206. And that's when I saw that, I'm kind of putting this together, and it's like, how many times have you not made a trade because the other guy asks you to throw in a second? You don't want to.
I'm thinking guys that like hit me now, or like like Isaiah Spiller and like Brian Robinson and stuff. You know, I guess that's maybe early second round, but still, like it's
No, but you know what? Those guys are perfect examples because you know what? I don't care if Isaiah Spiller has a better running back in front of him his whole career. If he starts like 4 times in the span of his rookie contract, he has exceeded the value of that 203 that you paid for him.
yeah. Okay.
Now he has to start and score enough points to be worth in my lineup. So when I say start, I mean not just you put him in your lineup, you start him and you get the replacement value. So it's around like 14.3 points per game historically.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's got to have 4 games over his career-ish to deliver that value of that pick. But if you have him, you're going to probably know sometimes to start him over his 4-year career. And that's it. So thinking about it that way, it's really got me thinking about, man, I did this a couple years ago, and it's like that's why I have a steadfast rule. If I'm going to pick a guy in the 3rd or 4th round, it's probably just going to be a running back. I don't even care who else is on the board. You know, if there's a receiver you really want, I'll trade out and get 2 picks. I'll get a future 3rd and another future 3rd if you want my 301 so you can go draft Khalil Shakir. You know, like that kind of process move is just ingrained in my brain. But that's the way of thinking that I think when you get to when you're doing this kind of stuff.
Tell me about auto accept trade block.
Yeah, so auto accept trade block, I'll keep it in a nutshell. It is essentially using the information of different periods during the dynasty years or during the dynasty year against your opponents. So it's exactly what I'm talking about. How do I have the roster that can go buy these spot starts during the season? Well, I got to be the team that's probably holding a couple extra thirds, a couple extra seconds, you know, a bunch of extra thirds in 2024. Like you got to set yourself up for that. And there are times during the year where free agency is a great time, right? How many people were going, oh, now I'm willing to go buy that player because he just got a contract, right? Like how many people were willing to, I'll give you an example. Well, Christian Kirk's even one of those guys you could put in that threshold of receivers, right? Like I still would want Christian Kirk on a roster. How about when Jamison Crowder signed with Buffalo? That's a perfect example of a guy. Hey, you want to give me a third? Cool. You can have him. And that's just because I'm taking advantage of the fact that someone else probably wanted him in April. And I'm going, how much has to go Jamison Crowder's way for him to be one of those wide receivers that's in that range that I even want? I'm willing just to take the pick in April. I'm going to get more bang for my buck by having that pick available to buy the spot start running back in October.
It's so tough because you're looking at like now if you do that and a guy like just say like Isaiah McKenzie got hurt and then all of a sudden you got a receiver that's going to play for probably the number 3 or 4 offense in the league. He's going to be playing a slot position for a guy like Josh Allen who's going to sling the ball all over the place. It's tough to man. I don't know. The process isn't as simple as you make it out sometimes. I guess that's
it isn't, and I think that's where the ability for me to step back and go, okay, I have 50 leagues. I got lucky because Jamison Crowder signed in a spot that actually makes him desirable for someone else on the market. There's a lot of receivers in the Jamison Crowder range. If he would have signed with the Giants, he would have been worthless. You know what I mean? So it really is like the time opportunity to actually be able to sell him is part of the value in the player himself, because there are players where, you know, if he would have gone and signed with the Seahawks the day after they traded Russell Wilson, you'd be going, oh, he sucks for Dynasty. Nobody wants him. Why would anyone even want him? So he would almost be a cut candidate on my team because he's outside of that threshold. And I'd go, I don't even want to waste a roster spot on him. So that's where I can look at my portfolio and go, John, I can acknowledge what you're saying. Jamison Crowder could be a wide receiver 3 on Buffalo if he's the slot receiver. I get that. But I got 8 shares. Maybe I'll keep 1 just to humor myself. But I'm selling 6. And that's where the portfolio comes in. I just immediately look at that player and I go, okay, selling my 6 Crowders. Anyone that gives me a third, they have them.
So do you have a percentage like that you have for players, every single player?
No, but if we're talking like a receiver in that range that goes from worthless to, okay, somebody might give me something, like Brian Edwards when he got traded to Atlanta. Brian Edwards was dead in Las Vegas when they acquired Devontae Adams, right?
Mhm.
But as soon as he went to Atlanta, you're like, oh, well, some of the people that liked him 2 years ago might give me a third. Okay, you can have him. If he hits in Atlanta and he becomes the 1 out of 20 that resurrects his career, I'll take the L. But generally, I'm going to be like, okay, this is my window to where the market actually will give me a draft pick. And if I can't get the draft pick, I'd rather have the roster spot. But if I can get the draft pick, I also got the roster spot too. So I basically killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I got a pick I can use later, and I have a free roster spot. Just like you were saying, when you trade away a player that everyone knows you're going to need to cut, and you see that trade go through, don't you kind of smirk and you're kind of going like, sucker? You know what I mean? Like, but don't you think that way? Kind of like, hey, you just did me a favor. You gave me
Right.
something that I can use later for something that I was going to lose anyway. So that's kind of how I look at it. That's where the process goes, and there isn't.
Man,
It's gut
this
feel.
this process can go. I could talk to you for 17 straight hours about this and be intrigued every second of it. And then the way you explain it and the way you present yourself and the way this is unfolding in this conversation, I'd love to have, when I come up with a couple more questions, I'd love to have you on again. And
Definitely.
for a part two, I'll come up with some questions and do a part two. And I can't, Scott, I can't tell you how appreciative I am for you to come on and kind of explain this, because it's so intriguing to me, and I learned so much from you already today, but I have so much more to learn. So whenever you get a chance, I'd love to have you back on again. And thank you very much for being here today. And this is why people like you are why this commissioner evaluation that I do for fun and my hobby. It's why I do it, because I get to talk to guys like you and learn every day in the fantasy community. So thank you very much for being on this podcast. Can you just one more time, Scott Connor, to just see yourself out and kind of tell everybody where you're at or where we can find you and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. You've been a gracious host. I'll be glad to come back. We'll do a part 2, we'll do a part 3, whatever. I mean, I'm always here. This is what I love to do. I'm a player at heart. So, I'm a content creator and whatnot. You can find me at Charles Chill FFB, hashtag Dynasty Leverage, Dynasty and Chill, Dynasty Trades in 5, writer for DLF, and then podcast host for Destination Devi. But listen, you could take all the content away and you and I could just talk Dynasty.
Absolutely.
And that's what I love. So if you're wondering why should I follow this guy, it's literally because 5 years ago I was just a player that was out there consuming podcasts, reading articles, going like, you could take all of this notoriety, Twitter follows, content, all that away. I'd still be there playing my portfolio because I love to play. I'd love to play Dynasty. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can find me in all those places, and appreciate you having me on, man.
I just found that in 5 podcasts last week, and I said, or the podcast, the actual YouTube. It's nice. It's a short little content. It's super. They're super fun to watch when I have a couple minutes myself. So awesome, you guys are doing those. Thanks a lot, man, and appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time, and I'll talk to you guys later.